Hello, everyone. My name is Keishan Dupuy with Redmond Mag. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. The topic of today's webcast is Identity System Defense for the Healthcare Industry, sponsored by Semperis. Purpose-built for securing Active Directory, Semperis delivers first-of-its-kind solutions to address the entire lifecycle of a directory attack, from finding and fixing security vulnerabilities, intercepting privilege escalation and persistence, and quickly responding to ransomware and other data integrity emergencies. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping details. We will have a Q&A session at the end of today's event, so please type any questions you have into the Q&A box found on your console at any point during the presentation. Semperis has provided us with great resources on the right-hand side of your screen, so please take a moment to check those out. And today's webcast is being recorded, so keep an eye out for the link in your email to rewatch or share with a colleague. And now I'd like to introduce you all to our speaker. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Marty Momdjian, EVP of Services at Semperis. Marty has 15 years of experience in identity incident response and healthcare resilience. We're in for a great event. And with that, the floor is yours, Marty.
Thanks, Kishana. Hi, everyone. Just want to thank you for taking the time to join us. So Marty Momdjian here. I'm going to run through a handful of slides and try to leave as much time as possible for Q&A at the end as well. As Kishana said, 15 years of experience in incident response, identity, specifically around healthcare. Overview of Semperis, really our focus is everything Active Directory, identity, resilience. We are focused on the foundational identity security side of the house, fairly well adopted across some of the largest healthcare systems, as well as other industries and verticals around the world. Diving right in, really what's going on in healthcare. I'm sure everybody knows what happened with Change Healthcare and United Health Group. It's been all over the news. Reportedly, they had to pay $22 million ransom to Black Cat around the same time that Black Cat was essentially shut down by international law enforcement. Also, the follow-up ransom hub demands that were coming out, essentially on the second ransom. That story is still developing, and pretty much all of my peers and everybody in healthcare has eyes on what's going on. Another major one was the Group Health Cooperative that just came out, that there was significant PII exfiltration during a ransomware attack. And of course, where I live in California, City of Hope is really big news. Really, what's occurred in the last couple of years is just a continuous momentum of adversaries and threat actors targeting healthcare organizations. And unfortunately, crime pays, and that's what we're faced with nowadays. Why healthcare? An area that I've focused on for a very long time has been incident response in the healthcare space. Specifically around resiliency, identity, and clinical infrastructure, which we're going to dive into. Essentially, the story has been its urgency and complexity of healthcare organizations, right? Patient data is extremely valuable. It's the patient, family members of the patient, there's patient health information, patient identifiable information, PCI information. And healthcare systems are extremely complex. In my previous lives, I've sat as the CTO and CISO of multiple very well-known healthcare systems. And at the end of the day, healthcare is complex because patient care is very, very complex. And everything relies on IT systems. And the way that our ecosystem is built is to deliver trusted patient care and bring patients into the healthcare systems, send patients home, make sure we capture revenue, and make sure we are following the patient's health and the continuum of health for the patients. And all of that depends on technology. Some of the other major complexities is IoT and IOMT is in healthcare now. Smart patient rooms exist, and everything is connected inside of the patient room. As soon as a patient walks through the door, healthcare systems start identifying the patient, collecting telemetry, and the goal is to provide better care. And also legacy infrastructure in healthcare. The cost of IT business is very, very expensive in the healthcare space, and legacy systems are around and will still continue to be around. One of the things that everyone's hearing about that I discuss pretty often is the third-party interactions and third-party vendors that tend to lead to compromises and ransomware attacks in the healthcare space. Most healthcare systems have hundreds, some thousands of third-party integrated systems that they connect with. And all of that is focused around delivering the patient care and revenue cycle for healthcare. Also, with the pandemic, healthcare did go remote just like everybody else, and remote care is a thing. There is hundreds of different entry points for clinical caregivers and physicians, nurses, doctors, pharmacy, to be able to deliver that remote care to their patient base within their region or outside of their region. Healthcare as well we are notorious for mergers and acquisitions, especially post-pandemic now, where healthcare systems are getting larger and larger with the goal of delivering better patient care to a bigger demographic. And all of this is really what is turning healthcare to become a target for adversaries and threat actors. The top attacks. Really, this is what's occurring based off our experience and based off talking to my peers in the industry. It's because of the complexity of the ecosystem. Healthcare systems have a pretty large attack surface, right? There are multiple devices for EMR access. Patients have multiple entry points to the healthcare system to check their patient record, do their billing, figure out their schedule. And also, healthcare has moved to a model of caregivers being able to deliver care from anywhere. And BYOD is larger than ever in healthcare right now. Also with that is the introduction of multiple identity systems and access paths, right? This is why identity systems are a very big target for threat actors and adversaries and bad actors. Everybody relies on Active Directory, which we'll dive into. And also cloud directory systems, Entra, any of the SaaS applications that are out there, and vendor access in general. And healthcare has very, very complex access management requirements, especially in the clinical and provider space, where organizations and IT doesn't just provision access. There are strict requirements for attestation and certification for providers. And there are a lot of organizations that the providers actually have multiple identities, and organizations that have providers that they share and doctors and nurses that they share with other healthcare systems as well. And again, it's multiple mergers and acquisitions. And then the most important piece of anything IT related in a healthcare organization is the EMR. It's the Cerner Epic Metatext of what they're running and the integrated applications that tie into the EMR itself to be able to manage the actual patient and the care lifecycle. What's most important here is you can't just restore clinical infrastructure. This is a lesson that we've learned over and over. This is an area that our Semperis incident response team for identity partners with customers on as well. It's very, very important to remember for everybody, you don't just restore the medical record system. There is hundreds of ancillary applications and tier 0 and tier 1 infrastructure that needs to work for the EMR to actually function. And with all of that, a lot of vendor managed systems. I'm sure everyone's heard this third-party vendors being compromised and breached, and then that leading to a healthcare organization having a cyber event. IT and IoT. Most hospital rooms have 50 to 20 connected devices at this point. Devices that collect telemetry, biometrics, monitoring the patient. We've moved into an area now where there is advanced machine learning and AI that are tied into cameras that are monitoring patients for bed fall, patient status, patient movement. And large hospitals are just stuffed full with IoT devices. And also just with care moving to the home of the patient, we are seeing IoT devices actually leave the healthcare system and go with the patient themselves to continue monitoring them. And then this also is the bridge between IT and OT systems. One of the biggest things that I always talk about and we recommend as an industry is the software bill of material is becoming extremely important in healthcare right now. There are a lot of legacy devices that have converted over into IoT that more than likely don't have the right security controls in place and the requirements in place. And with that comes along the software bill of material. And that's still something new in the biomed industry that we and everybody else is pushing for, to say as IoT devices come in, make sure they truly are secure and we know the supply chain for the software that the device is running. Hybrid identity, right? Move to the cloud. Healthcare has embraced the cloud, especially during the pandemic and now post-pandemic. This has caused a degree of turmoil because of the complexity of healthcare organizations, and most systems that, like I have done in the past, moving the EMR to their cloud vendor, it becomes extremely complex because we are trading off resiliency, availability, and reliability to get a better cost. And at the same time, we just can't take downtime for the EMR itself. This is also opening up a new class of potential compromises because of the increased attack surface that cloud itself introduces to, right? That whole shared risk model with cloud vendors essentially has become non-existent in healthcare. Most organizations, if not all, that are adopting the cloud from the CISO's point of view, they are also starting to become a lot more responsible and aware of the security controls requirements, the risk that is introduced, and all the policy and procedures that have to go along with it to make sure that the cloud itself is secure and that the vendors are also accountable for the security aspect. Another piece, that hybrid cloud for on-prem and cloud identity, there's really no healthcare systems that are 100% cloud focused, or hospitals or healthcare organizations. It is very important to know that Active Directory is still going to be there. Entra ID has pretty wide adoption, especially with Office 365 and productivity tools. And there's the popular identity systems and identity stores like Okta, Ping, that are out there as well, that is seeing pretty good adoption in healthcare. And then there's the IDP portion of the SaaS, which is introducing a lot more complexity in the healthcare space. And one of the biggest things that is occurring continuously is the usability and security aspect of healthcare. We want to secure provider identities, VIP identities, any type of executive in the healthcare system, as well as operations. But at the same time, because of the complexity of healthcare systems and the amount of applications that they have in place, single sign-on is very important. So as soon as we introduce MFA and step-up authentication and additional MFA requirements, it's really counterintuitive to what is required for single sign-on to make the clinician's job easy. The last thing any IT leader in healthcare wants to do is go to the clinical staff and say, I need you to multi-factor in when you see a patient inside of the patient room, and then multi-factor in again a few more times as you access the other applications. The downside of that is when identities are compromised and single sign-on being so critical that adversaries, if they compromise identity, will have access to more than just one application with a significantly increased blast radius. And I always laugh about this when I say, please make it stop, is Active Directory trust still exists. We know they're not secure, but AD trust exists because of the way that healthcare organizations are designed. And there's a good amount of healthcare systems that provide clinical services for critical access hospitals and locations, which rely on Active Directory trust. And we know they're not secure, but we do focus on that area to tell customers really pay attention to what's on the other side of that trust. Mergers and acquisitions, attackers love chaos, right? As soon as a merger and acquisition is announced in the healthcare space, they become a target for threat actors at the end of the day. It's a transitional event. It is chaotic, and vulnerabilities always exist essentially, but they come to light during a merger and acquisition event. This is also a time where Active Directory becomes a big focus for the security team, the CISO, and the CTO and the CIO, and anybody in IT in general, because this is around the time where the organizations are merging, trusts are set up for access, the identity boundary gets expanded, and more often than not, there are significant vulnerabilities that are discovered within the Active Directory infrastructure as these mergers and acquisitions are happening. And also incompatible security controls. There are a lot of legacy applications. During an M&A event, it's usually time to modernize those applications. with that comes the complexity of what is there for authentication that ties into Active Directory for legacy applications. And a lot of exceptions, right? People love to make exceptions for VIP physicians, clinical leadership, and anybody that is in the research area in healthcare to make their life easy. And those are things that really come to light in healthcare during a merger and an acquisition. And then emerging threats. There are more CVEs than ever. What has really come to light in the last couple of years is those vulnerabilities also exist for the cybersecurity vendors that are out there that are charged with securing the organization. You'll see a lot of network vendors, firewall vendors, even some EDR vendors that are out there that CVEs are being discovered. And that's normal. That's going to happen. The downside of that is, as adversaries see that, they do target healthcare systems, leveraging those vulnerabilities that are out there. Also within healthcare, unfortunately, it is critical infrastructure, right? Patient care is a life or death situation most of the time. And threat actors know this, and they know that a healthcare system cannot go offline for an extended period of time because of the complexity of downtime and recovery processes. And ransom demands are starting to increase at various stages of ransomware attacks and exploits that are occurring. One thing that we saw in the last 6 months is there have been some significant DDoS attacks against healthcare systems, mostly targeting academic healthcare systems that have been in the news, and they really do come in waves. Generally, they're volumetric attacks, but what we have noticed is in the background, when those denial of service attacks are happening, ransomware gangs are generally targeting healthcare systems to compromise their network and gain access when they can, and the DDoS attack really being a diversion. Cyber criminals have pretty much diversified their portfolios. They're running a business at this point. This really stood out with the latest event with Change Healthcare, and essentially Black Cat got their ransom, they disappeared and left their affiliates hanging, and now those affiliates are back demanding a ransom and trying to go for additional extortion events against those healthcare systems because of the data compromise. One other thing that really has stuck out in the healthcare space is cyber criminals are targeting the patients. All that data that's exfiltrated, the threat actors are essentially taking that data, going to the healthcare system and saying, hey, you need to pay the ransom or we're going to auction this data off. And if the healthcare system does or does not pay, they're starting to turn around and target the patients themselves to commit fraud because they are an easy target. And it's really a difficult thing to tackle because who's liable at that point? And one thing that's important is years of incident response. We know it's tried and true. Excuse me. Attackers don't break in anymore. They log in. Social engineering works. And if a threat actor or an adversary has access with my credentials or your credentials, generally the cybersecurity team won't be able to tell if that's really me or not, especially if they circumvent MFA. And hands-on keyboard attacks generally work. And they don't need to break in. They can just log right into the environment. That's where controls are critical, especially around identity. Top attack vectors, social engineering. It's been around for a long time. It still works. Phishing attacks still work. Third-party vendors and contractors are really the hot target right now, because why compromise a single healthcare system when a threat actor can compromise a third-party clinical vendor or an application vendor, revenue cycle vendor, and gain access to multiple healthcare systems. That's really where identity becomes a big focus, and the trust and VPN connections that exist between the actual healthcare system and their third-party vendor. Denial of service attacks we still continue to see, and a lot of exploits on vulnerabilities that are out there within the healthcare space. So what do we do? What do we do about it, right? Why is Active Directory the focus? It's not going anywhere. It's become even more complex now with the hybrid identities and Entra. Something I've said for many years is Active Directory is really built to just work. it's as secure as the organization wants it to be at the end of the day, especially identity security itself. It's all about applied and enforced controls and trying to limit exceptions. If you look at kind of the Active Directory stack, right? Entra is there to stay. There's wide adoption of third-party applications, generally outside of healthcare. Nearly half the breaches involve insecure Active Directory configurations. It is a systematic weakness, and Active Directory is a soft target. If a standard account is compromised, it's really not that difficult for lateral movement and for a threat actor to gain access to a privileged account. And with the existence of cloud identities that are extended out from Active Directory and Entra, that is giving the bad actors access to multiple cloud systems that are out there. And because of how in healthcare single sign-on is integrated and the priority, that gives bad actors access to pretty much anything they need as soon as they compromise an identity. Really covering, so what does the infrastructure look like for a healthcare organization, and why is Active Directory important, right? And most of this applies outside of healthcare as well. Most healthcare systems, if not all, have some sort of on-prem infrastructure that's tied into Active Directory. Virtualization stack that exists, your compute stack, your storage stack, anything that's running the EMR system itself is generally on-prem, and hundreds of application servers that are all AD integrated. The popular EMRs that are out there, Cerner, Epic, Meditech, they're all Active Directory integrated. Authentication, multi-factor, controlled substance authorization, any type of access to document management systems through the EMR, it's all AD integrated. It is built to be easy for the clinician to walk into a patient room, badge in, and start talking to the patient and delivering care to the patient. Another part that's important for healthcare is application delivery itself. Most, if not all, healthcare systems are running virtualized desktops, virtualized applications at scale, whether it's Citrix, VMware, or Microsoft. Really, that's another part of AD integration. Everything for that virtualized stack actually relies on Active Directory for application delivery, whether it's on-prem or it's remote. And third-party vendors, I use the little vendor logo, but third-party vendors, AD integrated, right? They all have Active Directory identities to get access to the applications they manage and work on the integrations to the EMR itself. And we also have pretty good SaaS adoption right now, and that is also tying right into Active Directory and the IDP and Entra that the SaaS vendors are running in the healthcare space. Office 365, Active Directory integrated with Entra, right? And a lot of what I call the fancy analytics, ML, AI, everything that's out there, especially for the data science side of healthcare, all of the research information. Well, guess what? The access to that is generally through Entra or an IDP that is also Active Directory integrated itself too. And any of the work that happens to sanitize that data is generally granted access to Active Directory, and the identity has to exist. There's pretty wide adoption that we're seeing as well of Azure Virtual Desktop right now that's integrated with Entra. Generally for remote workforce, remote coders, third-party support as well, creating that network segment behind NSGs inside of Microsoft Azure to have a secure landing zone and granting access to those vendors and keeping them outside your perimeter. But at the end of the day, authentication is integrated with Entra, which is also synchronized and integrated with Active Directory. And a lot of third-party cloud vendors as well, Azure, AWS, GCP, guess what? They all rely on Active Directory for authentication as well. And also, not to forget, within a healthcare organization, for all this to function, we need DNS, DHCP, Certificate Authority, Group Policy Management, MFA, single sign-on, and anything else that goes with the identity. What I like to point out is for organizations to really think about when there's a cyber event that occurs, you can't just isolate Active Directory or a domain controller or the entire domain. That will cause a significant impact to the healthcare system itself. that will cause almost every application to stop functioning. Clinicians will not be able to access the EMR. They will not be able to access their application delivery medium, and they will not be able to deliver patient care. Now, it's also important to think about, why do you have to protect Active Directory and have a resilient recovery solution for this? During a major incident, the first thing we do is say, hey, let's go into isolation. We got to start forensics. We got to figure out how the bad actors got in. And 10 out of 10 times, they have access to Active Directory credentials. So they could snoop around the network and get a lay of the land, figure out where the high value targets in the data is, and start exfiltration before they deploy ransomware or malware. And for us, it all comes back to Active Directory. Where's that identity we have to find? And we have to isolate, and we have to remove access for the bad actors. Worst case scenario as well, if Active Directory is compromised, without Active Directory, there is no Citrix or VMware. There is no EMR access. There is no patient intake. There is no EMS intake, and healthcare systems will have to go on diversion, especially for extended downtimes. And that's an area that we keep having to focus on during major incidents, is if there is not secure and sanitized backup and recovery for Active Directory, it causes a delay that takes between days to weeks to get Active Directory back online and to be able to start doing incident response and start restoring all of the applications and get them back into place for patient care to pick back up. And another part, integration engine, back to the IoT and biomed thing. Like, all of this wasn't complex enough. Healthcare organizations have an interface engine that takes all of the IoT devices, all of the applications, and makes it all talk to each other at the end of the day, and making sure all the right data is in the right place within the EMR for the caregiver to access. And all of that relies on Active Directory functionality as well. During and post breach, hopefully most organizations have a really good incident response plan and a business continuity and a clinical continuity plan. What's the most important thing to really focus on is RTO and RPO. Again, no Active Directory, there is no access. One of the biggest things I do when I talk to customers, when we do incident response planning, is focus on Active Directory. If there is no Active Directory, there is no login. If Active Directory is compromised and we are unable to have a secure and sanitized restoration of it, we got to rebuild Active Directory. Can't really log in and do incident response and forensics until Active Directory is available. And then we got to go figure out the RTO and RPO for their tier 0 and tier 1 applications and infrastructure. And then we can start focusing on the EMR itself, which is infinitely more complex. During a cyber event, this is really what we focus on for incident response and crisis management. Active Directory is number 1 on the list. I need network, I need firewalls, I need access, right? For access to work, I need Active Directory. I need to get service accounts online and figure out what are they applied to, where are those machine accounts, what do they have access to, and then what are the applications that we have to sanitize and bring online for minimal viable healthcare system to function. Forensics requires access. Again, no Active Directory, really hard to do forensics and get all the log information that we need. And communication notification. During major cyber events, not just in healthcare, generally in all industries, is crisis and emergency management needs to send out notifications. They need access to email. They need access to downtime documentation. Well, guess what? All of that relies on Active Directory being available for me to actually log in and get access to my communication platform. I know some of you are probably thinking, that's great, but I have a third-party system that I store my documentation in. I'm just going to go there. That's not AD integrated, but you still need to have the communication medium in place. You have to have email, you have to have secure chat, and hopefully not relying on SMS, but a lot of those functions require Active Directory for authentication, especially incident management platforms and incident management solutions for incident response and crisis management. 9 out of 10 times, they are Active Directory integrated. And tier 0 is the priority. Active Directory is tier 0. You can have your network up and running, your firewalls, your route switch, all of your cybersecurity tools in place. if Active Directory is not functioning, nobody can log into their work to actually do forensics and actually start the system restoration process to bring applications back online during an event or after an event. And really focus on recovering authentication first and recovering it in a secure fashion that you know what is functioning and what's not, and also who has access to what when authentication is back online. And downtime recovery planning. For us in the healthcare space, it's all about limiting downtime. The longer I'm down, IT systems wise, EMR wise, it usually takes 4 times as long to recover the EMR and do clinical catch up. And it's all about patient flow and revenue cycle. As much as we focus on patient care, revenue cycle is also critical because margins are razor thin in healthcare, and there's not a bucket of money sitting somewhere to keep the healthcare system running. What that requires is for patient care to function, I need Active Directory, I need Citrix or Horizon, I need the EMR, then I got to get clinical applications online, the interface engine online, and third-party vendor connectivity. And for all that to function, I need network, Active Directory, DNS, DHCP, whatever I'm using for MFA and single sign-on. And from there, we can start rebuilding all of the rest of the applications. And then what can you now, right? Zero Trust. Zero Trust has been along for a long time. There's a really big focus on identity-centric focus on that now. Really figure out where does identity fit in the Zero Trust model, and making sure the rest of the organization understands why it has to be identity-centric, because nothing functions without secure identities, not just in a healthcare organization either. Leveraging NIST cybersecurity framework, it's tried and true. And adopting an assumed breach mindset also helps, especially to educate everybody else within your organization. I always say, selfishly include identity threat detection and response in your disaster recovery planning. And this goes back to no Active Directory, no authentication. And without authentication, you really can't start restoring systems or gain access to your backup infrastructure to be able to recover those systems, right? And including identity as a part of your business continuity planning, because everybody outside of IT still relies on IT systems to do business continuity at the end of the day, because technology in healthcare is there to stay. And Active Directory is built to work. That does not mean it's always secure. It's always going to be as secure as you want it to be as an adopter of Active Directory and as somebody who manages Active Directory. Reducing the attack surface, it's continue to assess your AD environment and your identity environment. Any of your identity tools that you have in place and your solutions that are tied into Active Directory, any of your identity brokers, secondary identity stores, cloud identity systems, you need to have continuous assessment. And always identify and close those gaps. Indicators of exposure, indicators of compromise are critical. One thing I always do point out, again, back to service accounts. In healthcare, they're everywhere. Not really worried about shared accounts. I'm always worried about service accounts. Most, if not all, applications do not function and do not integrate without service accounts actually running. Service accounts generally have overprivileged access in healthcare organizations. And one thing we always say is look at the attack paths. Look at the attack paths on how those service accounts can be compromised, how delegated access is set up, and who has pretty much access to manage that service account or get to that service account. And also, as you do your assessments, always have a remediation plan in place. You're going to continue to always remediate. And look at those exceptions and make sure you don't just give out exceptions for privileged access and put them away and say, that's okay. Always revisit those exceptions on a quarterly and yearly basis and make sure as you do your assessments, you're remediating and removing access if it's not needed. Third-party vendors, again, very high value target for bad actors. And most third-party vendors have some sort of access to an application or a system, which introduces the threat of lateral movement. And a big thing is, I'm assuming most people that are here to listen to me talk about this for an hour understand what Active Directory is, right? You're here because you're worried about Active Directory, you know Active Directory. Don't assume that your application team or your operations team understands how critical Active Directory is. Always partner with them and educate them of what Active Directory is, how it integrates with your cloud infrastructure, with Entra, the importance of it, what service accounts are, and continue to work with them and educate them on the care and feeding, and especially the controls and security required for Active Directory. One thing I want to call out, our team has developed multiple tools, and these are free. It's for AD vulnerability scanning and assessments. Purple Knight, which I'm sure some of you know about. It's a UI-driven tool that shows you your indicators of exposure and possible indicators of compromise within your Active Directory environment. And Forresterwood, which is fairly new, it's a UI-driven visual attack path mapping tool. Both are great. They're free to go get. Go download them, run them in your environment, and become familiar with them. And with that being said, the NIST standard, right? Pre, during, post is critical. Active Directory should be the focus of that. And this is very critical for not just the incident responders, for the entire organization to understand, because you have to do forensics, you have to have continuous security monitoring, threat detection and visibility relies on identity, remediations rely on identity, incident response orchestration relies on identity, and you should have a cyber-first discovery and recovery plan, starting with your network environment, your security perimeter, and your Active Directory environment, and tie that right into your NIST framework. Key takeaways, and healthcare is still a hot target. I mean, Change Healthcare was just about a month ago, and it's all over the news. And I'm sure in the next few months, we'll see something else happen. And it's always front of mind. Hybrid attacks, Entra is here. Entra is fantastic, right? But at the end of the day, it's double the identity, double the attack surface. Even more complex in healthcare organizations that have multiple trusts running with other healthcare systems or affiliates as well, where there's multiple identities for each provider that exists. Lockdown Active Directory, limit exceptions, and also plan for security before, during, and after a merger and acquisition, and always have a plan in place for malware-free AD recovery. One of the biggest things that I run into over and over when I've led incident response for these healthcare systems is somebody knocks on the door in the command center and says, I thought we had Active Directory backups. It's like, yes, you had Active Directory backups, but you also backed up the malware in the compromised Active Directory environment. We can't just restore it. We have to have a secure and sanitized backup medium and a recovery plan. So that should always be front of mind. So I'm going to pause there because I've talked for a good 40 minutes and there's a bunch of questions.
Absolutely. We have a few come in, and I do want to quickly remind all of our attendees, we are trying to get to as many questions as we can, but please continue to put your questions into the Q&A box. Hopefully we can get to them, and if not, we're going to share them with the Semperis team and they will answer you directly. But keep asking questions. And Marty, let's go ahead and jump in. The first one we have here says, why would we need a separate backup of Active Directory when we already have an efficient backup system in place?
That comes back to the secure malware-free backup and restore, right? System state backups we rarely use during a cyber event, especially at a healthcare organization because of the complexity of it. And most adversaries and threat actors go right after Active Directory. If I was the bad guy, the first thing I would do is try to get my hands on a domain admin account, deploy malware and ransomware right through group policy, compromise sysvol, and convince the organization that they need to reboot their workstations to deploy out that malware. Secured and sanitized backup and recovery is important because you don't want to recover back to a compromised state, right? That just significantly delays the recovery and getting back to business operations, especially in healthcare.
Thank you. While the DoD use the NIST security model, what model is recognized to be the go-to for healthcare IT security controls?
Same NIST. healthcare is very aware, and NIST is tried and true at the end of the day. That model works outside of healthcare and it works within healthcare. And most, if not all, cybersecurity teams and IT teams in healthcare are very familiar of NIST.
Awesome. Okay, see how you feel about this one. Can you discuss the importance of identity system defense in protecting sensitive patient data and ensuring compliance with regulations such as HIPAA and GDPR?
Yeah, GDPR, I can't speak to that well, but HIPAA, I can assure you access to sensitive patient data. That patient data exists within the EMR. It exists within exports that come out of the EMR database, the operational databases, especially anything that's PHI and sensitive information, anything patient billing information. Most of that data that's compromised is exported from the EMR and placed somewhere in a file share, right? To get access to that, you have to have an identity and you have to have access to an AD account to be able to find that data. Unfortunately, it's kind of become the wild, wild west, especially with all the AI tools and everything else that's out there, where healthcare systems are starting to share that patient data. And they don't always do a good job of de-identifying the data itself. And it comes back to the identity system being protected, because if it is compromised, the user account itself and the identity itself is going to have access to all of that data that's out there in terms of HIPAA at the end of the day.
That was a big one. Thank you so much for tackling that. Everyone, we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Why would we need to worry about Entra ID when it already has strong protections?
Entra is as secure as you make it at the end of the day, is what it comes down to. And most of the cyber events that we see that are identity driven is due to exceptions being made. And I would always assume if Active Directory is compromised, Entra is 100% compromised. If Entra is compromised, that means your Active Directory environment is compromised.
Awesome. And Mark, I just want to pass it back to you. Is there anything you want to leave us off with, next steps, final thoughts, anything at all?
Mainly keep focusing on Active Directory. At the end of the day, IT operations does not function, clinical operations, business operations in healthcare, without Active Directory being functional. And Active Directory security is always number 1 on my priority list, and it should be on everybody else's as well.
Thank you so much, Marty.
It's free.
Yes, download. Woo! Thank you so much, Marty, for being with us today. And also thank you to the audience for attending today's webcast. We are out of time, but I want to quickly remind you to check out those resources, interact with Semperis. If you have any questions, go back through the deck. The recording link will be sent to you all. But again, today was sponsored by Semperis and presented by Redmond Mag. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Kishana. Thank you for joining, everybody.